Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Liz O'Brien. I'm the new program specialist here at the Mather Center. And today we have a wonderful panel. It's on Am I, My Home, and Community Prepared for an Emergency? We have the Emergency Operator Director, Mark McEwen. Fire Marshal Bob Booch. I apologize. Director of Human Services, Allie Ramcha. And Darienne's new Public Health Director, Mindy Chambarella. Welcome.
Okay.
Welcome. Welcome, everybody. We were here a couple years ago and we did this. It was pretty successful. We're going to keep this pretty open. I'm going to let Allie start with Human Services Department so she can let you know on them, and then we will go from there.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So like Bob said, feel free to ask us questions as we go along and just have this casual, interactive conversation. So from the Human Services Department, the most important thing I want you guys all to know is that we have an emergency call list. And what that list is a list, we have about roughly 100 seniors or people who have disabilities on it, particularly who might live alone, that's usually the case, or have special medical needs that we keep. And in case of an emergency, before a townwide emergency, usually it's hurricane season or winter storms, we will personally, the 4 people in my office will divide up the list. Some of you are probably on that list, and personally call to make sure that you're prepared and that you know what's going on, and we'll remind you the important things that you have to have in case of emergency. Remind you to go to the pharmacy to make sure you have all your meds just in case there's no power or roads are closed or shops are closed. Make sure that you have batteries for flashlights. Make sure that you have enough food and water and all those basics, and just make sure that you're okay. And we're there to chat and just kind of reassure you that we're here for you. Keep in mind that sometimes people do like to talk to us for a while and we divide it, so we're like, sorry, we have to go, but we're here for you. And the good thing about that is we also will then, we're part of the emergency operations team, and when there are emergencies like that, and Mark will get into that, various town departments work together, and we will report to the team that if there are certain clients on our list that do not have power, particularly if someone is on oxygen or has a hospital bed or whatever, or a CPAP machine or whatever it might be, that we will help try to prioritize with Eversource to get that, to focus on those needs getting restored. Not saying that they're special, but those are more urgent than people who aren't necessarily dependent on those machines. So spread the word. We're always willing and welcoming, and we want people to be on that list so that we can be available to help and know what your needs are. So anyone can call us, and we have brochures here for you guys later, and just ask to be put on, and we have that list, and we literally will call you, and then if there are power outages, we will then check on you, and we will call you personally and make sure that you're okay. We ask that you give us an emergency contact in case we can't get through to you. But all the seniors that are on it usually find it really reassuring and comforting, and we're there and know that we're there for you in emergencies. So spread the word. We're happy to have anybody come on that list. And if you have more questions about that, you can certainly ask me. That's where I'm going to start. Who's next?
Guess we'll go down the row, circle back. Mindy Chambrelli, I'm the new Director of Health, but I have been involved in emergency preparedness and things that have happened around town over the course of my time here, which has been almost 11 years. But so there's some things that we'll do to prepare for a storm, things we'll do during a storm or an event, and then after. So the health department has a 72-hour checklist. So we would start by sending out information to some of our permitted facilities, like our restaurants, for example. Prepare, put them on notice that something might be happening. This is if we obviously have noticed that, a hurricane is coming. We're still in the middle of hurricane season until November. So that is something to be aware of, and a role that we play beforehand. Other environmental things that we would be involved in is putting out communication to people that might be on private water supply, a well, a septic system. If it were to be a flooding event and let's say a wellhead was covered, we would want the public to know. We put out information that, don't use the water. If it looks funny, smells funny, discolored, you would want to chlorinate your well. And there's information on our website to tell you how to do that and precautions to take. If you're without power, you may be on a septic system that has a pump. Well, your pump's not going to work unless it's hooked up to a generator. Same with your well. Your well has a pump in it too. So if you are without power, that could create some potential problems, and we just want to make the public aware of those things. So also without power, thinking about food, not only, your personal residence and for our places that we permit. You're safe for hours if you can keep your fridge door closed. And that is a message that I routinely put out. Several hours, try to keep it closed as best you can to keep the cold in. For freezers, you have a couple of days if it's a packed freezer, right? But try to keep it closed and try to keep those perishable foods, as cold as you can for the longest amount of time. Flooding incidents, which you all know we've experienced in Darien, flood water is contaminated, right? It's not, people think, it came from the sky. Well, it comes from everywhere, right? It could be contaminated with chemicals or sewage. There can be any sort of pollutant in that. And, just be aware if you are impacted by flooding, don't walk through it, with open-toed shoes. Don't try to clean it up with your bare hands, right? You really want to clean with goggles and gloves and a bleach solution. So, just be aware of things that have become contaminated with floodwaters, especially if it's things within your home, right? So, letting it dry out, clean it good. If it can't be cleaned, discard it, right? If it's come in contact with floodwater, that is really a message that I want you all to leave here with, is that, floodwater is not pure, right? It has a lot of things in it. There's a couple of other points that I wanted to make. And Mark may talk a little bit about generators and power outages and potential that raises
carbon monoxide.
Carbon monoxide. But again, I just want to tell you that, we're all part of a team here, and, whether it's, preparing for, responding to, or aftermath for resilience, but, we're all going to be involved if something happens here in Darien. Okay?
Bob, take it. You want me to take it? So they've touched on it a little bit, but we are a team. This is only part of our team. The first responders are another section of what you see out in the streets and at your homes on a regular basis. EMS, fire, police. We always pay attention to weather forecasts and things like that. And statistically speaking, 2 days ago was the height of the hurricane season. In case you wanted to know, it's the day that most hurricanes have hit in the country. Connecticut is a little later than the rest of the lower part of the nation. So we tend to see storms in October and November, and September as well. But we're not out of it, and we always are here to discuss preparedness, not only for how we prepare, but how everyone needs to take a role in their own preparedness. So they've talked about a little bit that you can do. One of the things that I urge you to do is to be on our call list through Code Red. I'm sure you've heard that before. I know many of you are already on it, but in case there's some new folks in the room today or people on 79, you can go to the town's website and you can sign up for Code Red, and that'll give us the ability to dial out in an emergency everyone who's registered on Code Red. So whether it be power outages or flooding or chemical spills or an accident on the thruway or downtown, we use it for many reasons, and it gives us the ability to target locations. So we could target around, say, a mile circumference around an area, or we can target the whole town. And it takes about 10 minutes for those messages to reach everybody. So we call about 22,000 numbers. That's usually because of cell phones. There's not that many residences in Darien. But, if your children need the number or somebody you're friends with, it doesn't have to be the person calling to register for code red. Anybody can register someone else. I recommend you do it for people that live in Darien. If you have relatives that would like to know what's going on in Darien that don't live here, that's fine. But they need to be told that they may receive a call from you or from us that may impact the town, but wherever they may be, if it's the other side of the country, it may not be an issue, but you just want them to be aware, whether it's your child or a brother, sister, whatever that you may have. That is one of the biggest assets that we use to notify public, the newspaper, the media. We're getting pretty good at Facebook, even though I think there's probably not a big crowd in this age group that spends a lot of time on social media. We definitely hit the younger age groups with social media. Matter of fact, I think most of them don't put their phones down at any point during the day. It's hard to have a conversation anymore with younger people, but it's the way we have to reach our audience. So we have to hit everyone. We have to let them know what's going on ahead of the event if we know. Hurricanes, usually we have a pretty good, I'm going to say a week-long notice that we're having an impending storm. If you're down south, they may have a day or two sometimes to react. So it hits us a little differently than it hits down south, and we all, I think, can see that. But that doesn't mean that we don't have the effects of it. And flooding is the most common thing that happens in Connecticut. We not only have riverine flooding, but we also have coastal flooding. And we get impacted differently for most storms. It all depends on the tides. And as Mindy said, that flooding has a tendency to cause a lot of havoc in town. And in 21, for instance, there was substantial damage in Darien and Connecticut from what was a tropical storm coming from the south to and through Connecticut. So we fared pretty well back a few weeks ago in Darien itself, but Connecticut wasn't so lucky. If anybody has relatives or friends in the Naugatuck Valley and that area of the state, they were completely devastated, roads washed out. There's still some roads that are impassable. And major infrastructure that was damaged, and including the railroad, believe it or not. So I don't want to take too much of my time explaining how we operate, but we prepare as a team, we go through the response as a team, and we tend to go through recovery as a team. And I'm glad to say that I have folks like these people in front of you that work very well together, and we've all been working a very long time together. So we all know our way we like to handle things. But believe it or not, there's a good aspect of us working as a team, because every once in a while someone on our team will ask a question that none of us really had the mindset to be aware of. And it's usually the newest person that's involved, because they'll think of the things that, I'm a firefighter from my background, so I think as a firefighter. But occasionally we'll have somebody, currently the town has Marley, who's the public relations woman, who thinks totally like someone who's just a common resident in Darien, and will ask questions that I think we all feel at times like, wow, how come we never thought of that before? But those are the things we try to work as a team together to coordinate our responses and our recovery. So we'll give you enough time for questions, because that's usually where we get the most benefit out of this discussion. So.
I just want to say one thing, Mark. So signing up, because I know we've helped in Human Services help people sign up for Code Red. Mm-hmm. Do they have to do, do they have to do it online, or can they call? Because I think we've helped people online sign up. But
for a lot of people that don't have access to online or not savvy online, if you will, we will certainly help everybody. You can call our office, or you can call anybody you're comfortable with in town hall, and they'll make sure that you're signed up. Obviously, if you're getting the phone calls already, you all know that you are signed up. But the other thing that happens quite frequently, and it doesn't get noticed until we use it, is that many people are transient, and they move in and out of town pretty quickly sometimes. And usually right after we notify everybody in town, I get a dozen messages of people who have since moved to other parts of the country or world. And they're like, I really appreciate getting told, but I've been at a Darien for 5 years. So it's if you sign up and you register, you control when you get turned on and turned off. The reality is we can handle that for anybody who can't handle that. So call our office and we will take care of registering you. And, you know, whether it's one cell phone or 5, it doesn't matter. We're there to make sure everyone's aware of what's going on. It also has the ability to send out emails and text messages. It's very hard to send out a quick message via email because it takes time to coordinate that message, and also text messages are brief, so you really can't send out a lot of information in a text message. So that's why you usually get phone calls, and they're 2 minutes of time that we get to spend to give you the most information we can. By no means is it a all-inclusive list on what needs to be done, but the message is usually shelter in place, stay in your home, close your windows, etc. Or it's, you know, the flooding's coming, you should move to higher ground, or we're opening a shelter and you know, the shelter is going to be located at, you know, one of the schools or something of that magnitude. So that we definitely can do that for anybody who is either having trouble doing it or just chooses for us to do it instead of doing it themselves.
So, on my end, what we do, we try to make sure that everybody is safe within their homes, to make sure that you have smoke detection and carbon monoxide detection in your homes, especially when we lose power. If you have generators, carbon monoxide detection, so that if the generator is placed in a wrong spot and the exhaust is coming into the house, or if the wind takes the exhaust and starts blowing it, and it happens, it's you want to know that you've got carbon monoxide and you're able to call 911 for somebody to come and check and see why the alarm is going off. The smoke detectors for early warning. The carbon monoxide detector works basically on the same principle as a smoke detector. It's giving you an early warning that there's potentially a problem. The levels of carbon monoxide could be rising, but when it goes off, it's at low levels of carbon monoxide so that you're not in immediate danger. You have an opportunity, you know, to evacuate. And we offer installation of smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors for anybody who needs it in their home, their apartment. We are happy to come out and put them up for you, no charge. We even supply the devices. So we are very happy to do that for anybody. A couple other things talked about, if you had to evacuate your home, things that you should really consider bringing with you. They talked about your medications, important documents, insurance policies, identification, medical cards, any of that stuff. You should have basically a go bag or a go box that you can take with you to go be prepared. I was away a couple weeks ago and I met a gentleman from California who lived out where the fires are. And he had just moved to North Carolina about 3 years ago. And he explained to me what a go bag really is and how they had to live with a bag at their front door at all times. You know, he said they finally had enough when 4 houses away, the fire got as close as 4 houses to them. So 4 houses away and everything beyond was devastated. And he said, you live with this bag at your door. Your insurance, your passports, your licenses, your medication list, anything and everything is there at the door, because when they come and tell you you have to leave out there, you don't have time to go, oh wait, let me grab. So it's just something that you should all think about having prepared to have. You know, we have more notification here when we have a large event coming, that if you have to leave, you can get stuff piled up, ready to go, and take it if you have to leave your homes. The fire departments, they're all volunteer in town. They are here to help everybody they can. We are always out during emergency calls. We try to keep everybody to avoid flooded areas, because you don't know, like even on the roadways, if the road's flooded, you don't know what's going on under the road. There's the catch basins, there's manhole covers. With the volume of water, the pressure pushes them up and can lift them out of their spot. And you think you're walking along, a perfectly safe road, and all of a sudden you're in a hole because the manhole lifted or the grate lifted for the catch basin. So we try to tell them that's why we want you to stay away from the areas. Don't walk through flooded areas. Don't drive through flooded areas. We all know you've been around long enough, the drain bridge floods every time it rains really heavy. Apparently people still don't get that, but.
They don't get that trucks shouldn't go under it, right? And the trucks don't
Or
get
the
it.
big trucks that shouldn't drive under it. But we are here to help you. We are here to do, if you need assistance with something, if you ever have questions, fire prevention, you want something looked at in your home you're not sure about, we're happy to come out and take a look. And we don't charge for our services. It's all part of what we do for the residents of the town. Other than that, if anybody has anything else, otherwise we'll be happy to take your questions.
Yeah, I was just wondering, it's funny that you're here today. I was just driving up the street, my feet today. I live on Hoyt Street. I was wondering, what's the nearest hydrant to my house during a fire? I live at 550. It's just past the entrance to
Woodway?
Golf Course. The very next house, I'm living in front of the greasekeeper. I've never seen a hydrant around there.
There is,
So the opposite side of the driveway to Woodway,
Is there one there?
yeah.
between Woodway's driveway and
My driveway?
Country Club Road, and then there's another one on
Well,
the
Country
end
Club
of,
Road's way down, though.
right, and then it's between those 2 points, and then Behringer Road would be the next closest
All
one.
right.
So the insurance company considers, when they consider closest hydrant,
I know, yeah.
they look at within 1,000 feet to your
I know
home,
that, yes, I do.
otherwise the rate gets higher.
Anybody else? Anything?
Yes.
Speaking of fire hydrants, is the entire town, the entire area of Darien
No.
hydrant? No?
No, there are areas in town that have no fire hydrants.
Okay.
It's improved a lot. The aquarium has improved services a lot throughout the town. Years ago, there was no fire hydrants, no water service up in all of the northern end of town. North end of Hollow Tree Ridge Road, like beyond Camp Avenue, there's still areas up there that don't. But like Stephen Mather Road, all that area, northern end of Mansfield, northern end of Brookside, there's been some changes and some water mains brought down so that there is fire hydrants in that area now.
Another question. Smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector, for a two-story house, which is the best floor? First, second?
So you should have smoke detectors on every level of your home,
Okay.
as well as carbon monoxide detectors.
Okay.
Yes.
When you make the call, just like they leave a message on, if you're not picking up the phone. Oh, that's right. Do they just leave like an automated message?
So it should leave you a voicemail, and if you listen to that voicemail, it'll tell you that you can replay the message. You could actually dial back the number. I forgot what key it is, but it'll call that number, and then that message will play live again, even if it's a few days later. So that message is sitting there waiting for you. Obviously, if it's an urgent nature, then it may not be that great. One of the things I'd highly recommend if you're going to be on that list is that you put the number in your phones, and I could get that for you, not right this second, but to store in your phone so that you know who's calling you, because many times all of us have a tendency not to pick up when we don't know who it is. So it's kind of important to add the number to your phone so that you could see that it's the town calling you with an urgent message versus an 800 number dialing you to sell you more car coverage or whatever.
That's why I asked the question.
But the other one we're all getting now is Medicare sign-up periods and things like that. So there's all.
Not all of us.
I appreciate that. I've had my
Just kidding,
AARP
just
card a
kidding.
long time. The reality to life, though, is we're inundated all the time with calls we don't want, so I get the reason why, but it does leave you a message. Another thing that happens a lot is it has a pause. When you answer the phone and say hello, there's actually dead space.
Yeah.
And it's because they want to make sure that there's someone there before they start the message. So it usually takes you saying hello for the message to start playing. And if you don't say hello, a lot of times it'll be dead space and you'll just hang up. So it tells us all those connections that are made and not made, and whether it's left a message or not. But more importantly, if you dial that number back, it will actually play the message again. So there are unique things about it that's helpful, but obviously if you leave it as a voice message and you don't get it for a couple of days, it's not going to help you out too much. But That's why it's important to store the number into your phone. And I'll, if you want during lunch or whatever, if you want that number, I can get it for you.
Can I make a comment about hydrants? Sure. There's one near my house, and thank goodness we haven't had huge snowstorms lately. But being young, I remember, you'd get a foot or two of snow. We always had somebody shovel the hydrant out also, because you never know when that fire is going to be. And that way, when the firemen get there, they don't have to search for the hydrant, have to clear it out. That few minutes can make a big difference in a fire.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very helpful to us. We try to get a lot of them marked with like a hydrant flag.
Yeah.
Yep,
But still, the time to take to clear it
Yeah.
out could be that few minutes.
absolutely. And especially if it's been pushed with the road plows, when they're driving along and they're pushing that snow, it gets very heavy and it clumps up and it becomes like a block of ice.
So you can ask whoever does your sidewalks or walkways to help out that way too, help you guys out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
For the emergency notifications, I do get them on my landline, but I never listen to that because that's mostly crack calls. But who do I see about getting them on a cell phone?
I'll give you my card.
I'm going to backtrack a second because thinking of my emergency or my department's emergency call list, one thing to also keep in mind, and we don't have to do this often, thank God, but so if we call and we can't get through to you and we call your emergency contact and either we like to be someone fairly local, not like your child who lives in Vermont, but we also will then sometimes with the police or else on our own, we'll go to your home and do a welfare check to make sure you're okay. The last time we actually had to do that was Sandy. So that's how long ago. So normally we can get through, but just so you know, like we will make sure that our goal is to make sure that you're safe and okay. So just wanted to put that out there.
This is a very foolish question, but still so serious. Once for my entire life, near water lane, overflowed it, and I live in Juniper Road, private road, very nice neighbors, and they hit the everything hit, no communication. So four gentlemen and ladies hit here, so nice. Once they have the contact in whichever way, certain help is definitely 100% assured, I understand. Yeah. But in such a everything is shut it out from the, just knock the immediate neighbor, that's the first way. Or the immediate neighbor is not available, then they go to the next neighbor.
Yeah.
That's another way. But the human help is
very
desperately needed, not communication, shut it out. Then how they are just the conventional wisdom or the experiences for gentlemen ladies here, what is the best way to such a nothing is available, just humans walking to the neighbors, just the only way to.
Sometimes it is the best way, house to house, trying to make contact with people. And there was a storm back in the 90s where it flooded, the bay completely flooded out, and it flooded all the way up to Juniper Road. And sections of Tokenique were completely flooded out. And, pre-cell phones, code red, we were going door to door and, trying to get people to evacuate from their homes and checking on people to make sure they were okay. And, so it was, and a lot of it is the old school way of, neighbors talk to neighbors and you try to help each other too, the best you can.
Takes a village.
Yeah.
We have a lot of good neighbors in Darien, I have to say.
In that regard, you just reminded me of Sandy. We had the National Guard actually came and knocked on our door. At what point did they bring in the National Guard?
That storm was, they were talking, I'm trying to remember when the flood stages were.
That was Superstorm Sandy, right?
Yep.
There was a point in time where the information we were receiving in the Emergency Operations Center was that it was supposed to be much worse than what it ended up being, but there was a point where they expected the tide levels to be, I want to say, 6 feet over like the highest known tide to ever exist. So they basically put us on notice, if you will, to the point where we felt the need to make sure that we had the assets locally to do what we needed to do. And that included the fact that we only have a couple small fire boats plus a larger fire boat, a police department boat, and some other equipment that we could handle this storm. So there was mention of pulling in assets that could help us. So we called and reached out, and believe it or not, we had a swift water rescue team that came from Manchester, Connecticut. So it obviously takes a little while to get here. Things were put in place way before the high tide came, but that's things that we handle internally, where when we feel our assets are not enough, we'll request them, and there's a whole process through the state government and eventually to the federal government. And that's when you hear things like when FEMA deploys to the southern states for hurricanes and things like that. Those are steps that happen in our planning processes. So, we're lucky we have 75 to 100 volunteer firemen. We have about 51 police officers. They're not all on duty at once, obviously. So that we have assets that we have, and on a normal day-to-day basis is certainly enough for the situations we see. But in things like that and magnitudes like that, we have to rely on people from out of town. And in a situation like Sandy, it wasn't just Darien, it was all of the East Coast. So Manchester is not on the coast, and that was why things came in from areas that were on higher ground, if you will, I guess is the best way to put it. But it wasn't a lot of people, and the National Guard gets stretched very thin in a storm where it affects most of the state. I won't say all of the state, but flooding has a tendency to affect almost the entire state because there's so many rivers and streams that run through it, and Darien's no different. But yeah, those are all things that our team has to juggle and with knowledge and information and forecast it. And in that forecast, they were expecting it to overtop the Stanford hurricane barrier, for those of you that may have been boaters. I don't know if you've ever seen that structure, but it is substantial. It's a scary thought, but it would flood, I forgot how many residents in Stanford, but that indication tells us how many residents in Darien's going to be affected too. So those were some calls that we made, and thankfully we didn't have to actually perform rescues and things like that. Most folks got out with a warning in time, and people have taken it upon themselves to raise their houses and things like that since then. So
in that instance, I remember them coming and saying it's going to come 75 feet. It's going to come over your house. I live on Holly Pond, so that's where the water was coming from. It didn't come over our house, but it came right up to our door and or up the hill.
Right.
Flooded everything. But are you saying that National Guard came from Manchester, or they come?
No. So the National Guard deploys out of is it Bradley International?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a base on the water, which is in Niantic, and it's a fairly new base. There's also a base in Windsor Locks, I believe. I may be wrong. It's one of the airfields, and that's to bring shipments in and relay supplies. And there's also one in Middletown. So when we talk National Guard, these folks are coming from pretty far away.
Yeah.
So it's not something that we can wait on and then make a decision. There's things we have to do with as much practical knowledge and time that we need to get it implemented. But certainly if it's a tornado and it happens before anybody's notification, things are going to be delayed because of the responses. But we try to take that all into consideration. I don't want to scare anybody, because that forecast was something that I think most people that were sitting on that phone call were really looking at as, without Noah building the ark, we were in trouble. And thank God it didn't come to that, because it was a very scary forecast, and there were people in the room that were upset that, you know, aren't in the emergency services, and we all handled it with what we knew. So we were thinking, okay, it's going to be bad, and we know the levels that it hits the coastline with, but they basically were taking 3 storm forecasts because they were merging storms, and they said the worst case scenario is X, and it didn't obviously happen that way. So, but it was bad. It was definitely not a good day for Darien or the state of Connecticut. But you know, we saw neighbors, Fairfield, Stratford, along the coastline up that way where it was complete devastation. Darien, thankfully, Long Neck Point sits up very high. Parts of the bay and things like that are down very low, but we really don't have a vast coastline that's at sea level, which helps us. So
Rather be over-prepared than under-prepared.
always, I can always send people home. That's my motto. It's something we do in the fire service all the time. We ask for help and then we send them home. It's better to do that than to wish you had them when you need them. So there's a lot more that goes in, and we meet regularly. Every year the state of Connecticut has a emergency tabletop exercise where we'll talk about hurricane storms or highway accidents or I hate to use even the word, but violence, things like that. And we sit down as a team and we walk through it and how we would handle it and what we would bring to the table to utilize for handling whatever event that is thrown at us, so to speak. We participate that as our whole group. It's usually about 20, 25 people in the room, all the way from the superintendent of schools, chief of police, first selectman. Our team's pretty big. It essentially is every town department and their directors. So the department heads and us that are up here. But there's a lot that goes into it. Just listening to storm forecasts for a week sometimes gets kind of a harrowing experience, because 1 minute it's going to hit us directly, the next minute it's offshore, and then it sways, and you know, it's just it's constantly being aware of our surroundings, I guess you could say. But it's no different than what you all do when you go to, you know, leave your house in the morning. You want to know if it's going to rain and you have to put a coat on, or if you need an umbrella. So we just think of it at a larger scale. Yes.
You mentioned the National Guard bases. From what you said, they seem to be in central and northern Connecticut. Has there been any thought or consideration of putting something on the coast?
Where?
I guess the best way I could put, because I don't make these decisions, by the way, but I think a lot of it had to do with the Cold War. The National Guard bases shrunk, so there used to be one in Norwalk. If you remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
123.
123. There used to be.
It's not there anymore.
No, they sold the property even. But so the bottom line is, you know, the military, so to speak, kind of shrank over time. It's expanded back up somewhat. I couldn't tell you the number statistically how much it's grown since whatever year, but they get involved. So if you could remember COVID, and I hate to use the word COVID because it's back, but the reality is during COVID, the National Guard were the carriers of all the masks and things that the town handed out, if you remember all that. So they had about once a week, they would meet and they would deliver the stuff coming in, and it was shipped in by plane and it was coming in, and they would move it to where it needed to be distributed. And each town went to that distribution location. And in Fairfield County, it was at Sherwood Island State Park. Thankfully, it's during the time of the year where there's no tourists, so no one's sitting on the beach enjoying a cup of coffee or anything else. But the reality is they would ship that all through the military. So I got quite familiar with some of the folks because I was involved in that process. But it works. I don't know if they'd want to put bases where it's going to flood. It's just like you don't want to put a police or fire station where you're going to have to evacuate. It happens all over the country, though. I mean, remember Louisiana and fire stations were getting flooded, et cetera. So we try to learn from our lessons, I guess is the best way we can put it, and improve ourselves. So to some extent, I think we have a pretty good operation in Connecticut. I haven't seen it really snafu too badly in some of the events that I've been involved in. And I've been your emergency management director for about, I think it's almost 18 years now. It's been a while. And I've been involved in the fire service for 40 plus. So the reality is I think on a day-to-day basis, we have great coverage in Darien, and we certainly have neighbors helping neighbors. It's a very big volunteer town. Post 53, the fire service, our police officers definitely go above and beyond regularly in many capacities, and all our folks that are involved, Allie, Mindy, and the folks in the health department, et cetera, we all, when the time arises, we rise to the occasion. I mean, it's no different than when 9/11 happened and people were gathering together to, respond to that and recover from that. Darien had people that were willing to do quite a bit. So it's a challenge that we try to rise above, Any other questions, concerns?
I have a question. Talking about a forecast, what kind of services do you use then?
So,
Forecast.
everything. I'm going to tell you the funny part of that story. So on a day-to-day basis, I do not play weather forecaster. Just to let you know. I look out the window, and if the rocks aren't wet, it's not raining. So the reality of that is I pay very close attention to the news. I think most of us in our fields do. We watch the weather forecasts on all the channels, and if you ever listen to it, they all talk about multiple avenues of information. So even the national weather forecasts use more than just one. So in a hurricane, for instance, they'll run models continuously. And this past year, I went to the Florida Governor's Hurricane Conference. It's a place where they have so many hurricanes. I think they excel at what they do, and I learned a lot of information. I've gone before. This isn't the first time I've been there. But National Weather Service is there, and the Hurricane Center is very close by. So they have these folks that actually, you hear the names on TV, just like you do on, Good Morning America, for instance. These folks talk about what they do, and they run the models basically continuously, and they send out the planes that do the actual investigations and try to locate where it is and how strong the storm is and all that information. But we all use many sources of information. Ultimately, the state of Connecticut does have its own weather forecasters, believe it or not. They work in emergency management, and they actually relay weather forecasts, but they don't do it on a daily basis. So if a storm is coming or something severe is forecast, then I'd say they raise their elevation to more of an emergent issue. Then they notify us with those weather forecasts. So usually when the storm is in down south off of Africa, basically, we don't hear about it. It's when it starts to be a threat to the United States. So usually it's about, I'd say, a week away from us. It's usually a couple of days away from the lower parts of our country. But, it's many multiple sources, and there's models being run continuously. They update us almost every 4 hours, and these people get sick of all the stuff I send them. I get the information, I pass it along to our team. So we're not all sitting in one room all day long, every day of the week. We have jobs that we have to handle that are day-to-day issues and concerns from the public. But in an instance where there's an emergency, we all do get together, but that's far and few between, thankfully. Connecticut seems to be a pretty safe state when you think about it, compared to a lot of sections of the country. We don't get a lot of wildfires, we don't get a lot of earthquakes, but we sure get a share of flooding. So
And tornadoes lately, it seems like an awful lot
yeah,
of
the weather
tornadoes.
patterns have changed. I mean, I think now they admit the fact that, there's a lot of more severe weather events happening. Nobody can really give you what, why, or how, and it may just be a pattern we're in, who knows? But that's not my forte. So We take the information in and we distribute the information. So I take it in from the state of Connecticut sends me information, and then I send it on to my cohorts, and they all do different things with them. So before the storm, they'll plan for maybe additional staffing. So the police department might hire back a whole shift so that we have, instead of 5 or 7 patrolmen on duty, whatever the number is, they'll have 14. And the fire departments will say, hey, by the way, I know we're volunteers, we all have jobs, but they'll send out messages saying, okay, look, a storm's coming, we need to man the firehouse for the next 24, 48 hours or something along those lines. Same thing with EMS. So we all start formulating our response way before the response is necessary. And first responders are good at it anyways because they plan for all the crazy events that happen in the world every day. So, the fire departments and police department and EMS all are prepared for an emergency pretty much at a moment's notice. But take DPW or Parks and Rec, that is something that they don't really prepare for, I guess regularly, you could call it that. So they'll take that time and energy leading up to a storm, and they divide it into 24-hour increments, and they'll say, okay, 96 hours we're doing this, 48 hours we're doing this, 24 hours we should be doing this, and then of course the event. So they'll fix their chainsaws, they'll make sure they have fuel, the town will make sure that the fuel supply that we use for all our town vehicles is sufficient for the storm, and things of that magnitude, things that as a person runs a household or whatever you've done in the rest of your life, you can understand. So you take that time to be responsive and to be prepared. So that all leads up to the event. And then once the event happens, we make sure we have the manpower and staffing we need, and then we have to recover from the event. So it's not uncommon during a weather event of severe high wind that we have power outages that last a week and a half. So if you noticed over the last 30 years that I've been around this town, and it's more than that, but the reality is we've increased our generators. Almost every town building now has a generator, not just fire stations and police stations. The town hall's on generator, the senior center's on generator, the schools each have generators now, the shelters are fully generated. So we have built up a system to try to be prepared for an event as best we could, within the budget constraints. Anybody, anything else? Questions, concerns? Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, I didn't realize you were asking. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Would you use the senior center for a shelter if necessary?
We could. So I like to put it this way. We have multiple shelters we could use. There's obviously some that are better than others. The only downfall of the senior center per se is that according to the Red Cross, and they pretty much are the national shelter folks, we have to have showers and places for people to, maintain their cleanliness. So it's one shower here where the schools have multiple showers because of their athletic programs. So the schools gravitate a little more naturally towards serving a large number of folks, if you will. For instance, there's 1,200 kids a day, in the schools. It gravitates a little more naturally. They have a food supply for a large number of people. They have the workers they need. So yes, we could use it here, and there is plans to use it here, but the number of folks we can service here is far less than we can serve at Darien High School, for instance. But we keep everybody on that list of what we could use as a shelter, even Tokenie School, for instance. It's a small school, but it has things that we could use for a shelter. So that's why it's important for us to relay that information, because if the event ever happened, say at Darien High School, we couldn't use the high school, so we'd have to have a backup, which we do. So there are reasons why I don't like to promote that shelter. Everybody wants to know what that shelter is. Everybody wants to know what the primary shelter is. The problem with that is we don't want you showing up somewhere where you could be in danger. So we have to use the knowledge of what is transpiring in order to make the decision of where the shelter should be and all that. And, you know, it takes time to implement. You can't just unlock the door at 12 o'clock midnight and expect to service 300 or 400 people. So it takes a village. I think you said it best.
Just wondering, like with the flooding that goes on, I know the ball fields on the opposite side here got flooded with all things. Does the water come up here into like our parking lot also here for the senior center? Does this side of the brook get flooded also?
In all the years I've
No.
worked here, I've never seen it in the parking lot. I've seen it very close to the parking lot.
So that's good.
To where you're almost ready to say, let's, you know,
Because the opposite side.
get out of the way.
disaster.
But it's, you know, people, most of you who have lived here a long time know the areas that flood. So sometimes the message is, if you know you live in a low-lying area, please evacuate to higher ground. Well, every once in a while I'll have somebody say, well, where is that? Because they haven't been here a long time and they don't realize what sections of town get that flooding. And the hardest part about the flooding in town, I think, is that we're getting to the point where we can't get our emergency vehicles around town because there's so much severe flooding. I guess in 21, the chief of police, some of us were home when it started to unfold. So the chief had to sit in a parking lot in Darien because he couldn't even get to the police station. So if you remember that storm,
Yeah.
95 was closed in several locations because it was flooded. So it can be difficult to do our mission. The town garage flooded drastically during that event. The town lost a lot of public works and Board of Ed equipment then. So there are things that we have to do to help ourselves. But anybody else? Sure.
If you do get a message that says, you know, evacuate the higher ground, is part of that message where higher ground is, like
Yeah, we
shelter, or like you just know somebody that
the-
lives in higher ground?
I keep it brief because it's usually a much longer message. It'll tell you exactly where to go. Go to Darien High School, for instance, or whatever, Middlesex Middle School. Middlesex Middle School happens to be one of the highest points in Darien, in case you wanted to know. Yeah, so there are a lot of things that we have to tell people, taking consideration that not everybody's lived here a long period of time. Some people just moved in, et cetera. We have a lot of new folks moving in with all the developments we've had. Most of those are probably safe from that. But there's things Darien never had to face years ago that we're starting to see now. We're living in environments where we have a lot of people living in a development. That leads to, what if there's a fire and we have to evacuate the building? Now we have to shelter, you know, 189 apartments, for instance, or 122 apartments. You know, those things were never really dealt with back when I grew up. So it's constantly changing. Threats are changing. That's pretty much. But the message is much more in depth. I kept it brief for a reason, but in theory, no. We would tell you where to go. We would hope that you would avoid the areas that are low-lying to get there, because we all know that the roadway structures in Darien are affected by flooding, even on a somewhat severe event, not a very severe event. Both railroad, I shouldn't say both, all three railroad bridges, underpasses are significantly impacted by flooding. And from what people that have gone in there thinking it wasn't deep and find out that it's up to the roof on the cars.
That's right.
If you're not a Darienite, you probably don't know the elevation there. But if you lived here a long time, you realize that when you see the sidewalks are starting to flood,
Right.
there's already about 4 feet of water, because that's how much the roadway sunk underneath the bridges. But yeah, there's an impact there that, you know, we try to give you the full message. Sometimes we have to break the message into sections, though, because it doesn't let us record for that long of a period of time. And if we had it too long, people wouldn't listen to the whole message anyways. So we try to be as brief as possible.
I just wish people wouldn't go around the horses that are set up telling you not to go around.
I think that's one of the things that we try to communicate each and every storm. I know the National Weather Service tries to convince the motoring public not to drive through floodwaters. The message is there. We all get it out. It's human nature, I think, to some extent. You get people that drive large vehicles or high vehicles that tend to think that they're going to get through something. But, if you watch what happened just last month or what happened in Naugatuck and Oxford and that area of the state, it was sending vehicles, that's how fast the waterway was flowing. So it can take your car and it can take a truck. It can move it along. So, the trooper lost his life in the storm a couple of years ago. It took his cruiser and took it right off the road and into the floodwaters. So flooding is a very serious water in a different detail, if you will. We've built, when I say we, I mean man, has built up every square inch of this country that they could possibly build on, and it has impacted flood areas and areas that were known to flood even before they built buildings. And those are things that we are now living with. So we have homes that live in flood zones, and that's why you should be aware of, is your home in a flood zone? Do you have flood insurance? Flood insurance is underutilized. No one thinks their house is going to have a problem. Well, I hate to give you the bad news, folks, but nobody's home insurance policy covers flooding. I don't know if you know that.
That's right.
Yeah.
But nobody's does. Nobody in the whole country does. And right now we have people that just were flooded in the Naugatuck area that are very upset because their insurance company declined their damage. Flood insurance is there for a reason. I would recommend, I live on a very high hill in Darien, I'm lucky, and I have to tell you, I've considered flood insurance, and I got what it costs per year from my insurance carrier, and it's not a lot of money if you're not high risk. So that would help you if you were to suffer flooding from whatever reason. Like you said, that waterway gets dammed up by debris, and now you've never had flooding before, and this happened 2 years ago. Well, no, it's more than that now, 3 years ago. In 21, we had people on West Avenue and up from West Avenue that were flooded that never saw floodwaters before, because the river that goes through the woods was impacted and blocked up the railroad underpass. So that those things can happen to you, you don't even realize it. So that's one takeaway, if I could recommend to the town of Darien and the people that live here. Look into flood insurance, and if you're not high risk, it's very affordable. If you're high risk, then I would say you definitely have to have it, even though it's going to be more expensive, because you're at a high risk of seeing floods. And we have people that moved into town after our last flooding event who know very little other than they're in a flood zone, and they don't know what that means. They've told me that themselves. I don't know what that means, and I'm like, well, that's a hint. If it's in a flood zone, that means it floods. It doesn't mean it could flood, and it doesn't mean it's an inch of water in your basement. It means it floods. And we all have seen it. I mean, Darien Times, Darien News, what was the old one, Bob, many years ago?
News Review?
News Review. Darien Review, yeah. So for those of you who lived there a long time, we've seen the pictures. We've seen homes with 12 feet of water in them. So if you're in a flood zone, you should heed warning, and you should be ready to have a go bag and to leave. I don't think that affects any of the folks here, but any other questions? I could talk about this all day. I thought I saw your hand up.
Oh, no, this is because I live in Jersey. Hello, everybody.
Jersey's good.
But I just think it's kind of crooked that they're even selling houses in flood zones. And my understanding that like a lot of insurance people aren't even covering you for flood insurance. And like you said, they denied their insurance.
Yeah.
So this is like,
I guess.
One of my things too is where I'm at.
So one of the things I guess, and New Jersey floods too. My sister lives in Jersey, and it floods all the time. Somerset County. So the reality to life is, homes were built where they were built, and they didn't see flooding for 30 years, and everybody was happy. They were making money. They sold the house to the next couple. They moved in because they could afford it. What's happening now is you have the homes, and these people's livelihoods were put into their home.
Right.
So they want to they want to be able to get out what they put into it. So it's hard for the government to turn around and basically tell someone, you know, you've lost your entire life savings and we can't help you out. So we're living with those consequences of decisions that were made generations ago. And that has to be solved somehow, and I don't know the right way. FEMA does have programs in place to help. Darien utilizes them in the past. We seek grants constantly. We're seeking them right now. Some of you who live in flood zones may get a letter from what they call WestCog, which is Council of Governments, for those of you who don't know all these lingos. WestCog is our region, and it goes up into the Danbury area, which is Region 1, Region 5 for all of you that live in this area. We like to call it Fairfield County. So the reality to that is they're trying to promote these grants that could either elevate your home, or they could help the town buy the property and then demolish the home and then put what should have been flood zones and natural activity in, you know, back to nature, so to speak, and let the flood zone do its job. So but it takes forever. You know, it's like a long-term goal. It's not going to fix people's problems today. We've had people apply for grants repetitively for decades almost before they actually achieve that goal. And part of that grant process is your home has to be destroyed so many times before they'll actually do it, because they won't do it unless there's a reason for them to do it. So if they're called some severe repetitive losses. So if your home is in a severe repetitive loss or a repetitive loss, there's not a lot of difference between those two categories. It just means that if you own one of those, you're going to want whatever you can to get out of that, because you are going to flood. Whether it's 100-year or 500-year, you're going to flood, and you're going to be devastated. And we've had people with young families move in, and they've been on News 12, for those of you who watch cable TV. You know, never knew it was going to happen. We had to swim out of the house. You've all heard the stories, and it's everywhere in the country. So if you can get flood insurance, I highly recommend it. I'm not an insurance salesman. I get nothing for it. But the reality to that is it does help people get back on their feet after it happens. And I think the denials is part of the journey, if you will. So they like to deny people before they actually tell you, okay, we'll do something about it. FEMA denies, quite honestly. They'll tell you right to your face that don't be surprised you get denied, and then they'll approve it after. You basically have to just do more. It's like your medical insurance. You know, the insurance company tells you no, and then eventually they'll tell you yes, but they give you a lot of hurdles to accomplish. So that's the world we live in. But any other questions about preparedness, mitigation, our emergency responders or emergency response, or other activities? What's for lunch? We'll talk about what's for lunch.
Thank you all for your time.
Hopefully I didn't offend everybody.
Thank you for keeping us, getting us all prepared and keeping us safe.
Threat, and it's